Henry Emily is one of the most important yet understated figures in the story of Five Nights at Freddy, and understanding him requires looking not just at what he does, but at what he represents. He is not a constant presence like some other characters, but rather a quiet architect whose influence shapes nearly every location and event. While others in the story act impulsively or destructively, Henry is defined by patience, restraint, and ultimately a need to correct what has gone wrong. Henry begins as a creator, an engineer, and a co-founder of the company behind the restaurants. In the early days, his role is tied to innovation and imagination. The animatronics, which later become symbols of horror, originally come from a place of creativity and entertainment. This origin is important because it frames Henry as someone whose intentions were not malicious. Unlike others who would later exploit or weaponize these creations, Henry's work was meant to bring joy. However, this makes the eventual corruption of his creations far more tragic. The same machines designed to entertain children become vessels of suffering, and this transformation is something Henry is forced to witness from a distance. The relationship between Henry Emily and William Afton is one of the most important dynamics in Five Nights at Freddy's, not because it is constantly shown, but because everything in the story grows out of it. Their connection begins as a partnership, built on shared ambition and complementary skills. Henry is the engineer, the careful designer who creates the animatronics and gives form to the business. William, on the other hand, is more difficult to define in simple terms. He is involved in the same projects, but his mindset is fundamentally different. Where Henry sees possibility and creativity, William sees opportunity and control. In the early stages of their partnership, there is no clear indication of conflict. The restaurants they build together represent a kind of idealized vision of family entertainment. These locations are meant to be safe, inviting, and imaginative. This shared goal is what makes their eventual divergence so significant. The same creations that come from Henry's desire to entertain are used by William for something far darker. This is where their relationship begins to fracture, even if that fracture is not immediately visible. A key aspect of their dynamic is imbalance in awareness. Henry does not initially understand what William is doing behind the scenes. While Henry focuses on improving designs and maintaining the business, William operates in secrecy. This creates a situation where the partnership continues on the surface, but underneath it has already begun to collapse. The tragedies that follow are not just random acts, they are betrayals of the trust that originally defined their collaboration. The turning point in their relationship is deeply personal. The death of Henry's daughter, often associated with William's actions, transforms the conflict from professional to intensely emotional. At this point, William is no longer just a partner who has made unethical choices. He becomes the direct cause of Henry's greatest loss. This moment redefines everything between them. It is no longer about differing philosophies or business practices, but about irreversible harm. The partnership cannot survive this, even if the story does not show a direct confrontation at the time. What makes their relationship especially compelling is how indirect it becomes after this point. Unlike many rivalries, Henry and William do not engage in ongoing, visible conflict. Instead, their opposition unfolds across time and through environments. William continues his actions, causing further harm and embedding himself deeper into the consequences of his own choices. Henry, in contrast, withdraws. This withdrawal is not surrender, but a form of delayed response. He is processing, observing, and ultimately preparing. A defining aspect of Henry's story is loss, particularly connected to his daughter, often referred to as Charlotte. Her death becomes one of the earliest and most significant tragedies in the timeline. Unlike many other events in the series, which are hidden or obscured, this loss is deeply personal. It is not just another incident tied to the business. It is the moment where Henry's life and work are irreversibly broken. The idea that one of his own creations, or at least something connected to his world, becomes associated with her death adds a layer of guilt that shapes his later actions. From this point forward, Henry is no longer simply an inventor. He becomes someone burdened by responsibility for what his creations have enabled. What makes Henry particularly interesting is his absence during much of the unfolding chaos. While the company continues to operate, expand, and repeat its mistakes, Henry is not actively present in the day-to-day events seen in earlier games. This absence can be interpreted in multiple ways. On one hand, it suggests withdrawal, possibly driven by grief or disillusionment. On the other, it creates the sense that Henry is observing from afar, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Unlike characters who react immediately, Henry's role is delayed, which makes his eventual return far more impactful. By the time he re-emerges in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, Henry has shifted from creator to orchestrator. The pizzeria presented in that game is not a genuine attempt to revive the business, but a carefully constructed trap. This marks a fundamental change in how Henry approaches the situation. Earlier, his creations were used to build something. Now, he uses a location to end something. The building itself becomes an extension of his will, designed to gather all remaining threats into one place. This is not a reactive decision, but a calculated plan that likely took years to develop. Henry's final speech in that setting reveals a great deal about his character. He does not express anger in a chaotic or uncontrolled way. Instead, his tone is calm, almost solemn, as if he has already accepted the weight of everything that has happened. This composure makes his actions more powerful. He is not seeking revenge in the traditional sense, he is seeking closure. The distinction matters because it shows that Henry is motivated not by hatred, but by a need to stop the cycle permanently. He recognizes that as long as these entities continue to exist, the suffering will continue as well. Fire, which appears multiple times throughout the series, takes on its most deliberate meaning through Henry. In earlier instances, fire is ambiguous, either accidental or ineffective in fully resolving the problem. Under Henry's control, however, it becomes purposeful. It is used as a final measure, a way to ensure that nothing remains to carry on the cycle. The destruction of the building is not an act of desperation, but a planned conclusion. Henry effectively turns the location into a controlled ending point, where every lingering element of the story is brought together and eliminated. Another important aspect of Henry is how he contrasts with the other major figure tied to the company's darker history. Where that figure represents chaos, manipulation, and a willingness to exploit both technology and people, Henry represents responsibility and consequence. This contrast is not just between two individuals, but between two philosophies. One creates without regard for the outcome, while the other ultimately takes responsibility for everything that has happened, even when it was not entirely his fault. This willingness to act, even at great personal cost, defines Henry's role in the narrative. Henry's story also explores the idea of control. Early on, he creates machines that are meant to perform specific functions, but over time, those machines act beyond their intended purpose. This loss of control mirrors the broader narrative, where events spiral beyond what anyone originally planned. By the end, Henry attempts to reclaim control in the only way left to him, by ending everything entirely. It is a drastic solution, but within the context of the story, it is presented as the only definitive one. In a broader sense, Henry can be seen as the moral center of Five Nights at Freddy's, even though he is not always visible. He represents the idea that creation comes with responsibility, and that ignoring consequences allows harm to grow unchecked. His final actions are not about undoing the past, which is impossible, but about preventing it from continuing into the future. This makes his role less about heroism in a traditional sense, and more about accountability. Ultimately, Henry Emily is a character defined by transformation. He begins as a creator driven by innovation, becomes a grieving figure shaped by loss, and ends as someone who takes decisive action to bring closure to a long chain of events. His story is quieter than others, but it carries significant weight because it addresses the central question of the series. What happens when the things we create go wrong, and who is responsible for making it right?